Welcome to Americana Archives. Today's headline is A President's Love. This story has a few subheadlines which say, The Romance and the Life of James Buchanan in Early Manhood. A chapter of history published for the first time by the Globe. His strong passion for the lovely Letitia Duncan of Erie, Pennsylvania. She did not reciprocate, and her father entered emphatic protest. Letitia gave her heart to a handsome young fellow, Dan Turner. Her lover afterward committed suicide, and she pined her life away. Buchanan swore a vow never to marry and kept his pledge. Letitia Duncan dies in Wabasha County, Minnesota, at the age of 97. Letters from Buchanan to Letitia, published now for the first time. A somber-tinted picture of what was and what might have been. The Globe reporter chased by wolves while investigating the matter. It says, just 1 week ago, the simple inscription, Letitia Duncan, aged 97 years, 5 months, and 1 day, was cut in a plain headstone in the little village graveyard at Lake City. Resting peacefully within the small snow-covered mound, and apparently forgotten, is all that remains of one whose fair girlish beauty, courtliness of manner, and noble character in years gone by were responsible for 3 broken hearts and a fearful tragedy. At her feet, a President of the United States laid his all, only to meet with bitter disappointment and lifelong suffering born of unrequited love. Retiring into celibacy, he never allowed his thoughts to assume the shape of affection for any other, and died unmarried. Here is a page of unwritten history, a story of one of the saddest romances that ever appeared in print, and a chapter which every American will read with interest. Numerous idle rumors have been often circulated as to why President James Buchanan never married. It remains for the Globe to destroy the fallacies in existence and reveal the true facts secured by thorough investigation, actual observation, and the possession of original letters and trinkets that prove the truth of the story beyond the shadow of a doubt. 2 weeks ago, Letitia Beauvais died a few miles from Lake City, aged 97. She was believed to have been the only sweetheart President Buchanan ever had, and, it is said, had a number of letters from him hidden away amongst her effects. The above item went the rounds of the newspapers a few days ago, and with only this slight clue to work on, the Globe representative went to Lake City. Many of the citizens remembered the old lady's death, but discredited the story of the letters, as did the newspaper men living there. No interest was taken in the matter. It was laughed at and joked about. No one cared enough about poor old Letitia to look the matter up. In Lake City on Saturday night, the weather was frightfully cold. During the night, the mercury shot down to 38 degrees below zero. The house where the old lady lived was 6 miles in the country, over bleak prairies and unbroken roads, filled with huge snowdrifts. Postmaster Dave Irwin, a genial young gentleman, entered heartily into the scheme to drive to the old home, and arrangements were made to go in the early morning. Sunday morning, the thermometer registered 44 degrees below, but the idea was not abandoned for an instant. Good-hearted Tim Foley secured a double sleigh, and away we went, Tim driving. 2 miles in the country, while plunging through huge drifts, the sleigh suddenly sank almost from sight, and the pole snapped from the sleigh. Unhitching the horses, the party struggled to the nearest farmhouse and borrowed a bob, 3 planks on a pair of runners. The journey was continued. Passing through a strip of gloomy woods, Irwin looked behind, and with a quick jump exclaimed, "For heaven's sake, Tim, look behind us." Tim turned. "Wolves be the heavens," he exclaimed, and brought his whip heavily on the horses. They broke into a gallop, and the wolves increased their pace until alongside. On flew the bob, and on came the wolves. The road led over holes and buried stumps. Occasionally, Tim snapped his whip sharply at the wolves, and they would drop behind, only to come on again. Finally, we emerged into a clearing, and the beast slunk back into the forest. A few miles further on, we came to the place where Mrs. Beauvais resided when alive, and entering the house, were introduced to Mrs. Stewart, aged 84. Yes, she said, Letty died here, poor soul. I'll give you all the papers I have, and returning with a box, emptied its contents on the bed, from which the reporter selected what papers he desired. Yes, said Mrs. Stewart, in answer to a question. Letty often spoke about Buchanan, but not so often as she spoke of Lieutenant Turner, Buchanan's successful rival. You see, Buchanan was poor, and Letty's parents were very cruel, especially her father. Her other remarks made up a portion of the story given below. 2 miles further, the party drove to the pretty home of Farmer E. Wrigley. He kindly brought out letters, trinkets, etc., that tell the tale. He is the administrator of Letty's effects, which are now in the possession of the Globe representative. Letitia Duncan was born in a tavern in Erie, Pennsylvania, August 29th, 1790. Her father kept the place, and it was known by the battered sign in front as the Farmer's Tavern. Here Letitia was raised and splendidly educated, though not allowed to do a stroke of labor of any kind, and to the day of her death knew not the slightest rudiments of cooking, sewing, or other household duties. When about 18 years of age, she was the belle of the town and country, and every swain for miles around laid his heart at her feet. Wonderfully beautiful, with long raven black hair and deep black eyes, one loved her at sight. Her grace, courtliness, noble character, and pure mind were the talk of the village, and she reigned supreme. Across the street from her father's tavern was a printing office, and here young Buchanan was an apprentice. He lived at the tavern, and there met Letty Duncan, falling in love with her at once. He began his courtship, and his suit prospered rather fairly until Mr. Duncan, learning the state of affairs, forbade Buchanan the house and ejected him therefrom. James and Letitia met secretly, however, and thus matters stood until handsome Dan Turner appeared on the scene, in the pretty uniform of a second lieutenant of the United States Navy. He stopped at the tavern when passing through the village, and accidentally met Letty. It was a case of mutual love at first sight, and from that hour Buchanan's love was hopeless, though he knew it not at that time. One should not understand by this that Letty heartlessly led him on, or was in any respect the coquette. Though Buchanan wrote her letter after letter, telling of his fierce, undying love, and couched in the most endearing terms, Letty never told him that she returned his affection or favored his advances. The contest between Buchanan and Turner waged hot, and again old man Duncan took a hand by forbidding Turner to enter the house. Finally, one day, Turner and Buchanan, who were on the most friendly terms, though acknowledged rivals, resolved to brave the old man's wrath, and together marched into the kitchen, where their queen happened to be. They were compelled to retreat, as Letty attacked the advancing body with an iron ladle, saying, "This is no place for gentlemen." Turner, however, was Letty's lover, and she acknowledged him as the one she loved. He was soon obliged to join his vessel, and here Buchanan scored a point by proposing to Letty. Sad to relate, she rejected him. Broken-hearted, Buchanan stumbled to his room, and sitting there, wrote to Letty the following letter. My dear Letitia, I shall never link my fortunes with anyone, my dearest girl, unless they are with you. Your father's cruelty is measured by the depth of my pocket. I shall never marry, Letty dearest, so fare thee well until death. James Buchanan. He thought the reason Letty rejected him was because of her father's aversion to him, on account of his menial position and poverty. The truth is, however, that Letty was devotedly in love with Turner, and wanted to accept him as her husband. Sometime previous to the above letter, Buchanan launched into poetry, and one day, his only queen, Letitia, was the recipient of the following, written in a cramped hand and dedicated to her. To Letitia Duncan. Her lovely hair and ringlets wore, and hanging over her shoulder, she was fit to entice the heart of any man who'd behold her. Her teeth were white as the ivory showed, and her breath was spice wherever it flowed. Her father was cruel, a sight of me he could not endure. The reason why? Because I was poor. I durst not enter the dwelling, where dwells my lovely jewel. James Buchanan. This poetry Letty seemed to prize highly, and carried it continually until a few weeks before her death, when it was laid away in a box. Though rejected, Buchanan still continued to write passionate letters to his lost love, but they could only be good friends, Letty said, and Buchanan finally lost all hope. The town became hateful to his sight. His old associates and associations grew irksome, and he could not bear to remain where every little thing constantly reminded him of his loss. He decided to leave, and then penned his last letter to Letitia as follows. My dear Letitia, I can no longer endure a sight of the place that held my happy hours, as even the budding flower reminds me of you, whom I shall never see again. The place is blessed to contain a flower like you, dear Letty, but weeds like I must seek some other habitation. So, dear girl, I send you this timepiece as a remembrance that poor James loved you and never shall love another. Goodbye, my love. May you be blessed by God is the wish of your heartbroken. James Buchanan. To Letitia. Accompanying the note was a watch that is now in the Globe reporter's possession. The long chain contains a charm, made of the finest gold, and set with a beautiful topaz, a key and a heart-shaped locket, constructed of delicate golden threads, of the most exquisite workmanship. In the watch case, outside back, are set 10 amethysts and 1 turquoise, while all around the case is elegantly carved. It is so old that it is going to pieces, and is quite delicate. Letty always carried this in remembrance of James. The chain is a double one, and seems scarcely so thick as a common piece of twine. So after writing this letter, and presenting her the watch, Buchanan left Erie, and went either to Lancaster or Philadelphia. Tune back in next time for part 2 of this incredible story. This story came from the great state of Minnesota, being originally reported in the St. Paul Daily Globe on January 17, 1888. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.